His phone lit up on the bathroom sink while he sang in the shower like everything was fine. I saw the message from Kayla, intern. It said, "I miss you." My hands went cold, but my mind didn't freeze. I typed in our anniversary, his passcode, answered her pretending to be him, and sent the screenshot to myself. He had no idea I already knew. No idea I'd already set the trap. Friends, before we dive into this story, I want to ask for a small favor. If you're here listening, please take a second to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I truly appreciate the support. It means more than you know. Steam curled around the bathroom mirror while I stacked the last of the clean towels on the shelf, trying not to focus on Darnell's voice behind the shower glass. He was humming that same damn Usher song he always sang when he was in a good mood. Totally relaxed, like life was just fine. I reached for his phone to move it out of the way, and that's when I saw it. "I miss you," from someone saved as Kayla, intern. Just like that, everything inside me turned cold. My hands stopped working for a second, just hanging there with a towel halfway folded. I stared at that message like it had slapped me in the mouth. My heart started pounding, but I didn't feel shocked. Not really. This wasn't out of nowhere. Just last week, I found hotel charges in Austin when he was supposed to be at a conference in Houston. Then there were those late-night Cash App transfers to a name I didn't recognize. I asked once, calm as hell, and he brushed it off like I was being dramatic. But this was clear. This was a whole heart emoji, and a woman bold enough to miss my husband in writing. I wasn't imagining anything. I should have thrown the phone or yelled or burst into tears, but I didn't. Something in me flipped instead, like a switch that had been waiting to go off. My fingers moved fast, typing in our anniversary. His go-to passcode, the same date engraved in our wedding bands. The phone opened like it had nothing to hide. I didn't even hesitate. I opened Kayla's message thread, tapped out, "Come over, my wife's out tonight," and hit send. Then I took a screenshot, texted it to myself, deleted the message and the photo from his phone, and set it right back where it was, like I'd never touched it. My breathing was slow and steady, but my thoughts were racing. What kind of fool did he take me for? He couldn't even be smart about it, using the same damn passcode, leaving the phone in plain sight like I was some kind of background extra in his life. I looked down at the towels in my hand like they didn't matter anymore. All I could think about was what would happen next. I wasn't going to scream or beg. I wasn't going to be that wife. I was going to let this girl walk right through the front door. I walked out of that bathroom moving slow, like I had time, like I wasn't holding a bomb in my chest. I straightened a pillow on the bed, smoothed the comforter like I was getting ready for company. Darnell was still singing, still scrubbing, still being the man I thought I knew. And me? I was rearranging our bedroom like it was a set for a play I'd just written. The lines were already in my head. I pictured her standing in the doorway, smelling like cheap perfume, and thinking she was about to play house with my husband. I thought about how Darnell would look at her, then look at me, then wish he'd never been born. My hands were steady as I moved through the room, but my mind was spinning in 1,000 directions. I thought about our son, 2 rooms down, asleep with his headphones on, and my stomach twisted. I thought about my parents who loaned us half the down payment for this house. They believed in our future, and this man was throwing it all away for an intern with soft curls and no damn sense. The rage was real, but it was clean, focused. I wasn't about to cry. I went to the hallway closet, pulled out my overnight bag, and slid it under the bed. Not because I was running, not yet, but because I needed a backup plan in place. I wasn't stupid. I'd grown up watching what happens when women ignore the signs. My mama stayed quiet for years about my daddy's slips, holding her pride like it was something holy while her insides broke piece by piece. I swore I wouldn't be her. I wasn't about to let Darnell lie to my face one more time while I played house and smiled through it. My fingers itched to pick up the phone and call Aaliyah. She'd know what to do, what to say. But I didn't. Not yet. I needed this to unfold on my terms. I needed proof in the flesh. Let Kayla come. Let her stand in my foyer and call his name like she belonged there. Let her see me with my wine glass, my calm voice, my legal documents ready to go. This wasn't about revenge, it was about clarity, about making sure nobody ever questioned how this fell apart. I wanted it burned into their memory. Simone Harris doesn't get played. When the water finally shut off, I was already in the kitchen, pretending to load the dishwasher. Darnell came out of the hallway, shirtless, towel around his waist, grinning like he was about to ask me if I wanted to try some of the gumbo he'd been bragging about all week. I looked up and gave him a soft smile, the kind that makes a man think everything's just fine. "You in a good mood tonight," he said, walking over to kiss my cheek. I let him. I let him kiss me with the same mouth that probably whispered God knows what into that girl's ear. I nodded and said, "Just feeling peaceful." I meant every word. He stood there, stretching, flexing, being casual, and I studied him like I was memorizing a scene I'd never see again. He was just a man who made a choice and didn't think I'd ever find out. And me? I was already somewhere else, mentally clearing my schedule for the fallout. He walked off humming again, like nothing in the world had changed. But it had. I had. And in my gut, I knew we'd just passed a point we couldn't come back from. Back in our bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed, watching him move around, picking out clothes, checking emails, complaining about some dumb meeting. It all felt distant, like background noise. My phone buzzed with a text from Aliyah, just checking in, and I ignored it for now. I needed to hold the mask a little longer. I needed this night to play out exactly the way I planned. The silence between us wasn't tense. He didn't suspect a thing. He thought I was just tired, maybe even a little quiet from stress. He had no idea I had just invited his side piece to our house. No idea I'd already packed my bag and gathered the receipts. I looked at the clock. If she left right after getting the message, she'd be here in about 40 minutes. That gave me enough time to set the stage, pour some wine, and act like the loving, clueless wife. Let him sit there and sweat when she walks in. Let him try to explain. Let them both realize too late who they were dealing with. I wasn't scared. I wasn't sad. I was ready. I stood by the front window watching the street, my wine glass in hand, pretending to be calm while my heart kept thumping against my ribs. The neighborhood was quiet, porch lights glowing, a dog barking somewhere down the block. Then I saw headlights slow down in front of our house, a silver sedan. I held my breath. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment, like she was working up the nerve. Then she got out, adjusting her dress, smoothing her hair, checking her phone. I walked slowly to the door and opened it just before she knocked. There she was, Kayla. She smelled like Bath and Body Works and desperation. She had a tight little box of cupcakes in one hand and her phone in the other, eyes darting over my shoulder. When she saw me, confusion flashed across her face, then the kind of fake smile girls practice in bathroom mirrors. Is Darnell home? Is Darnell?" she asked, like I was the help. For half a second, something hot and shameful rolled through me. Humiliation, right there, in my own doorway. But I caught it, swallowed it, and smiled back with teeth. "Yes," I said, "come in." And I stepped aside like a damn queen. I guided her into the living room like she was a guest we'd invited over for dinner. She looked around with wide eyes, probably taking in our framed wedding photos and the giant canvas our son painted for Father's Day. She hesitated when she saw the couch, cream-colored, spotless, expensive, and I motioned for her to sit. "You can put those cupcakes on the table," I said. Her hands trembled just slightly. I handed her water in a cheap paper cup like it was all I had, and then I poured myself red wine into the heavy crystal goblet from our anniversary set. I didn't say much at first. Just smiled and sat down slowly next to Darnell, who had walked in 5 minutes earlier and looked like he wanted to melt into the carpet. He kept his eyes on the rug. I kept mine on her. "So," I started, "Darnell and I were just talking about our lake house plans. We found this property out near Cedar Creek. It's beautiful. Perfect for family weekends." I glanced at him, watched his jaw tighten. "And of course, we're still contributing to Jeremiah's 529. Gotta think about college now, right?" I said that part looking straight at her. She blinked fast, nodded, sipped her water like it was vodka. I leaned back against the cushions, legs crossed, glass in hand. I had never felt more composed and more vicious in my life. Darnell cleared his throat once, but didn't speak. He knew better. I watched Kayla shrink with every word I spoke. I talked about our dream of having a second child, how we'd been trying before things got busy, how Darnell had just gotten a raise. I never raised my voice. I didn't need to. She shifted uncomfortably, glancing between us, probably wondering how the hell she ended up in this awkward domestic nightmare. She looked like a little girl playing grown woman, sitting in that tight red dress, legs pressed together, makeup just slightly smudged at the corners. I let the silence sit for a second too long. Then I tilted my head, smiled again, and said, "Funny thing happened earlier tonight. Some bold girl texted my husband, said she missed him, sent a little heart and everything. Can you believe that?" I sipped my wine. Kayla froze. Her mouth parted slightly like she wanted to speak but forgot how. Then I saw it. The moment the truth hit. The color drained from her face. Her hands gripped the cup like it might keep her from falling apart. Maybe I should," she started, standing halfway. Darnell still hadn't said a word, just sat there like a coward, letting me do all the work. Kayla's voice was high and shaky now. "I think I got the wrong. Maybe there was a mistake." I stood up calmly, still holding my wine, and gestured toward the door. "You should probably go," I said gently. "It's late." She grabbed her bag and the cupcake box like she was trying to erase the fact that she'd ever been here. I walked her to the door, slowly, quietly, Darnell a statue in the corner. The second we stepped into the hallway, I leaned in, close enough that she could smell my perfume over hers. "If you ever message my husband again, I will forward every screenshot I have to your parents, your job, your pastor, and whoever else needs to see what kind of girl you are," I whispered. She flinched like I'd slapped her, then ran to her car without saying another word. I stood in the doorway and watched those taillights disappear down the block. When I closed the door, my body finally caught up with me. My legs felt like jelly. I leaned against the wall and let out a slow, shaky breath. My hand still held the wine glass like it was glued there. In the kitchen, the dishwasher beeped like everything was normal. In the living room, Darnell stood by the window, arms folded, jaw clenched, still not talking. I didn't say anything to him either. I just walked past him, barefoot, quiet, straight into the bedroom. My mind was racing, but my outside stayed calm. My hands shook only when I was alone. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor. I'd won that little battle, sure, but I knew damn well the war hadn't even started yet. The real fight, the one that would cost me something, was with him, with the man I married. The one who stood beside me in photos and smiled while building a second life behind my back. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I took a deep breath, set the wine down, and looked at myself in the mirror across the room. I didn't look broken. I looked ready. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed listening to every creak, every movement in the house. At some point, Darnell knocked once on the bedroom door, soft like a kid, scared to face punishment. I didn't answer. I heard him walk away. My phone buzzed with messages from Aliyah. "Did she come? You okay?" But I couldn't even type a reply. I just stared at the screen. My body was drained, but my brain wouldn't shut up. Everything had shifted now. There was no turning back. The moment I opened that door and let Kayla in, I broke something on purpose. I had set fire to the idea of pretending, and once it burned, all that was left was truth. Raw, ugly, necessary truth. The kind you can't walk around anymore. I curled under the blanket, fully clothed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. I knew the next steps would be messy. Divorce, documents. My son, the house, the money, the lies. But I also knew this. I wasn't scared anymore. I was furious. I was focused. I was done hoping. And when the sun came up the next morning, I sat up, stretched, and started packing the rest of my things. I stood in the living room with Darnell's phone in my hand and the thick smell of his fancy gumbo hanging in the air like a joke. The house felt too quiet, like everything was holding its breath. He was standing near the kitchen island, talking in that calm voice he uses when he thinks he can manage me. I didn't answer. I didn't warn him. I lifted the phone and slammed it down on the glass coffee table as hard as I could. The sound was sharp and final. Cracks exploded across the glass in a white web. Darnell jumped back like I'd thrown it at him. "Simone, what the hell?" he shouted, like I was the one out of control. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from all the words I had swallowed for days. I stared at the busted table like it was proof that something was finally broken on the outside, too. He took a step toward me, hands out, like he wanted to calm me down, but I backed away. I was done being calmed. My chest was on fire. The pretending was over, and there was no way to turn it back on. I walked straight into the kitchen without looking at him. The pot of gumbo was still on the stove, rich and dark and perfect, the way he liked to show off when he cooked. He followed me, still talking, explaining nothing and everything at the same time. I grabbed the heavy pot with both hands, lifted it with a grunt, and dumped the whole thing into the trash. It splashed and steamed against old paper towels and coffee grounds. The smell turned sour instantly. "That's my love right there," I said, my voice shaking but loud. "Once it's contaminated, it's trash. I don't eat trash." His mouth fell open like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Maybe he thought I'd just cry on the couch. Maybe he thought I'd beg. Instead, I turned back to the living room, went to the dining table, and started laying everything out. One by one, bank statements, hotel confirmations, Uber receipts, screenshots from his work iPad. I spread them like cards in a losing hand. Every lie he told me was sitting right there in black and white. He stared at the papers like they were written in a different language. Then he started talking fast. Stress, pressure, a mistake, a moment of weakness. "It didn't mean anything," he said, over and over, like that was supposed to save him. I felt tears burning in my eyes, and I hated that part of myself for still reacting. "It meant enough to risk everything," I said. My voice cracked right down the middle. He tried to touch my arm and I jerked away. I could feel my whole body vibrating now. I went down the hall, pulled the suitcase from under the bed, and started shoving clothes into it without folding a thing. He followed me, still talking, still pleading, telling me we could fix this, telling me to think about our son. I was crying openly now, hands shaking so hard I dropped a pair of jeans on the floor and kicked them into the suitcase. "You should have thought about him," I said. "Not me. Him." The hallway light clicked on and off behind me, and for a second I thought I was alone in the room. Then I saw the door down the hall move just an inch. Our son's door. His eye was right there in the crack, wide and scared. He wasn't crying. That somehow made it worse. He saw the suitcase. He heard the voices. Nothing I could say would make this look like anything but what it was. He closed the door slowly, like he didn't want to be seen. The sound of it clicking shut hit me harder than the phone did on the glass table. My chest seized up and I had to sit down on the edge of the bed for a second because I thought I might pass out. Guilt crashed into me all at once, heavy and loud and full of questions I didn't have answers for yet. I wanted to run down the hall and pull him into my arms and tell him none of this was his fault. But my legs didn't move. I stayed sitting there with my face in my hands while Darnell stood helpless in the doorway, finally quiet. I zipped the suitcase with shaking fingers and stood up. My eyes were swollen, my throat raw, but I was steadier than I expected to be. I carried the suitcase down the hallway, past the closed bedroom door, past the cracked glass table, past the dining table covered in evidence. Darnell followed me like a shadow. At the front door, I set the suitcase down and turned to him. For a second, everything rushed through my head at once. The wedding, the hospital when our son was born, the talks about retirement, about growing old together. The future I thought I had flickered like a bad light bulb. "My parents' money is in this house," I said quietly. "My life is in this house. But what you did doesn't live here with me anymore." He reached for me again. I stepped back. "I'm done," I said. 2 words, flat, real. The kind of words you don't take back. His face crumpled like he finally understood this was really happening. I pulled the door open, and cold night air rushed in, wiping the smell of gumbo and broken glass out of my lungs. I lifted the suitcase, stepped onto the porch, and didn't look back again. The street was quiet, too quiet for how loud my heart was. My hands were numb around the suitcase handle as I walked toward my car. I didn't know exactly what I was going to say to Aaliyah when I got there. I didn't know how long I'd be on her couch. I didn't know how this would land on my son in the morning. All I knew was that I was leaving and not turning around. Every step away from the house felt like stepping off something solid into empty space. I was scared in a clean, sharp way, the kind that keeps you moving. By the time I backed out of the driveway and drove into the dark, my whole life felt like it was behind me in the rearview mirror, shrinking fast, and I had no idea what waited at the bottom of the cliff I was jumping from. But I jumped anyway. I sank into Aaliyah's worn gray couch like my body had been holding itself together just long enough to fall apart right here. The fabric smelled like old lavender spray and fried catfish, familiar in a way that made my chest ache. She didn't ask questions. Just walked in with a box of tissues and a glass of red wine, placed them next to me, and sat quietly on the other end of the couch. I pulled one of her old HBCU hoodies over my head, the one from her Spelman days, soft and baggy, and let my whole face crumple. The first sob hit me so hard I thought I might throw up. Then they just kept coming. I cried until I was choking on it. My face was wet, my shirt damp at the collar, my hands trembling. Aaliyah never moved. She didn't try to fix it. She just let me come undone, like she already knew there was no stopping it anyway. I gripped the hoodie sleeves like a child and rocked forward, trying to quiet myself, but I couldn't. Every breath was heavy. Every second felt like 1,000. I didn't know where to start, so I just said his name. Between the sobs, it all came spilling out. "Kayla," I muttered, barely above a whisper. "The intern." I told her about the text in the bathroom, the cupcakes, the couch. The way I poured wine like I was hosting a goddamn dinner party while everything inside me was breaking. I told her about the hotel charges, the Cash App transfers, how calm I felt right up until I saw my son peeking through the crack in his bedroom door. I could barely say that part without crying all over again. He looked at me like he didn't know what was happening, I said, wiping my face with the sleeve. Aaliyah didn't interrupt. She just nodded slowly, like she was holding space for me to get it all out. I walked out with a suitcase and my whole life behind me, I said. That boy, he didn't even ask me to stay. He just watched me go. The silence after that sentence was heavy. I stared at the floor, blurry and shaking, while my heart kept replaying the image of my son's eyes, full of confusion and fear. That's the part that wouldn't stop echoing. Then I told her about Mama, about how she stayed with Daddy through cheating and God knows what else. How she told me when I was 16 that a good man slipping up wasn't a reason to burn your whole life down. Don't be another single black woman raising a boy alone, she'd said, like that was the worst thing you could become. I could hear her voice in my head now, loud and disappointed. I could feel the guilt blooming in my chest like mold. What if I messed it up too fast? I asked Aaliyah. What if this is just what love looks like after a while? Saying it out loud felt disgusting, like I was betraying myself. But the truth is, I'd spent so many years watching Mama hold her pain in silence, it had started to look like strength, like sacrifice, like duty. Aaliyah didn't flinch. She turned toward me and said, "That secret didn't save your Mama. It buried her. You think she's proud of that life, or just too tired to question it anymore?" I swallowed hard. Her words cut deep and clean. My chest rose and fell like I'd been punched. "I'm tired," I whispered. "I'm so damn tired, Aaliyah." She nodded, then finally leaned in and grabbed my hand. "You didn't break your family, Simone," she said. "You broke a lie." I held on to those words like a raft. They were sharp but warm, just enough truth to feel like something I could maybe believe in later. I looked around her apartment, smaller than mine, cluttered with books and post-its and law files, and realized how still it was. Safe. Honest. There wasn't a single thing in this room pretending to be perfect. "You know what you need to do next," she said. I nodded slowly. She stood, went to her desk, and came back with her laptop already open. "We're not doing this emotionally. We're doing this with receipts and power," she said, clicking through folders like a machine. "You've got screenshots, you've got paper trails, you've got a son watching everything. So we document, we draft, and we strike when it counts." Her voice was calm but firm, the way she sounded in court. It snapped me out of the fog for a second. My tears had slowed, my breathing too. I wasn't okay, but I wasn't drowning anymore. She started listing things we'd need: work iPad screenshots, financial records, text message logs, and I pulled out my phone, shaky but focused. The messages were all still there. I forwarded them to her, one by one, as she created a folder called Darnell Evidence and titled a blank doc Simone Legal Plan. I watched her move like a surgeon, precise and unfazed. It helped. It gave me something to do with my hands, something to build instead of collapse. "What about his job?" I asked. "It's corporate. He's not just some warehouse supervisor." Aaliyah looked at me like I was forgetting who she was. "Exactly. Which means they've got an HR policy that says relationships with subordinates are misconduct. Which means he's not just a cheater, he's a liability." My lips parted, but I didn't say anything. I wasn't ready to think of him as someone to go after. Not yet. But I also couldn't let him walk around clean while I sat in this hoodie with my life shattered. For the first time in days, I started to believe maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was just the moment the curtain dropped and the real story started. The night crept in outside her window, and I finally leaned back into the couch, my body heavy but not hollow. My phone buzzed twice, one message from Darnell, one from my son. I didn't open either. Aaliyah handed me a blanket and sat beside me, flipping through her notes. "You don't have to do it all tonight," she said, "but you're not alone anymore." That hit me harder than I expected. I stared at the screen for a long time, thinking about what it meant to break something on purpose, about how many women in my family had swallowed betrayal and called it strength. Maybe this wasn't about starting over. Maybe it was about stopping the cycle. I looked at the laptop again, the folders, the proof, the plan. I was still scared, still heartbroken. But for the first time since that message lit up in the bathroom, I felt something else under the pain. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. It was small and quiet, but it was mine. I pulled the blanket over my legs, curled into the hoodie, and told Aaliyah I was ready whenever she was. We opened the first document and started writing. I sat at Aaliyah's tiny kitchen table with my laptop open, phone buzzing beside me, and a stomach so tight I thought I might throw up. The room was quiet, except for the soft click of her keys and the hum of the fridge. The light above us flickered once but stayed on. I kept scrolling through my phone, screenshot after screenshot, and emailing them to her. Darnell's hotel receipts, late-night cash app transfers to Kayla, messages that said things like, "Next time I'll book a suite for us." I couldn't even look at them too long. Each one made my face burn and my skin crawl. Aaliyah was all business, typing fast with her reading glasses sliding down her nose. She didn't flinch. "We're calling this what it is," she said, her voice low and clear. "Abuse of power. Inappropriate workplace conduct. Personal use of company funds." I nodded, but it felt like I was floating above my own body, like I was watching someone else hand over the receipts that might destroy the father of her child. I kept swallowing, trying to stay calm, but my fingers were stiff with guilt and my heart wouldn't stop racing. I paused mid-email and just stared at the screen. My hands hovered over the keyboard. "You know, he's one of maybe 3 black senior managers in that whole building," I said. My voice came out smaller than I expected. "They've been waiting for him to mess up." Aaliyah didn't say anything right away. Right. I kept going. What if I'm feeding it? The whole stereotype, the reckless, unprofessional, sexual black man who can't keep it together. I feel like I'm giving them exactly what they want. My eyes filled with tears again, but I forced them back down. Aaliyah looked up from the laptop and folded her hands on the table. "Simone, he gave them what they wanted. You're just holding up a mirror. That's not on you." I wanted to believe her, but my mind was a mess. I thought about Darnell sitting in those stiff conference rooms, being watched, being tested. how hard he'd worked to climb that ladder. I knew the looks he got. I knew what it cost. And still, he'd risked it all for texts and hotel rooms and late-night rides with a girl who had no idea how deep the consequences could go. Aaliyah sat back in her chair and let out a breath. "You know Kayla's a black woman too, right?" she said, eyes locked on mine. "Young, just starting out, intern, probably doesn't have anyone protecting her. Darnell knew better. He had power over her and he used it for sex. That's not just cheating, Simone. That's a professional violation. She's got something to lose too." I hadn't even thought of it that way. I'd been so focused on my own pain, my son, my marriage, my mother's voice echoing in my head, that I hadn't really sat with what this meant for Kayla. That twisted something new in my chest, rage, but also recognition. I still didn't like her, but I could finally see how she wasn't the root of the problem, just another branch off the same sick tree. "This isn't revenge," Aaliyah said gently. "This is accountability. And it starts with naming things for what they are." I closed my eyes for a second and nodded. She was right. I hated that she was right, but I needed her to be. I reopened my email app and started dragging files into a shared folder labeled HR Report. We built the document line by line. Aaliyah handled the legal framing, adding in policy language from Darnell's company that she pulled up online. No relationships with direct reports, no use of personal accounts for client-related spending, required reporting of gifts or perks. I added the timestamps, the details, the receipts, the Uber logs that showed pickups near her apartment on the same nights he claimed to be working late, the screenshots where she called him babe. We included it all. By the time the file was done, it was 17 pages. I sat back and stared at it. It didn't look like a bomb. It looked like justice printed out in Arial font. I wanted to feel proud of it, but all I felt was cold. Like the act of writing it had frozen something inside me. Aaliyah opened a blank email, addressed it to HR, copied the CEO, attached the PDF. "This is your choice," she said. "We can wait. We don't have to send it tonight." I stared at the screen, my heart loud in my ears. My hand hovered over her trackpad for a full 10 seconds. Then I clicked send. Right after we sent it, I ran to the sink and threw up. Just wine and acid, but it felt like punishment. Aaliyah came in quietly, handed me a towel, and said nothing. I sat on the kitchen floor for a while, knees pulled to my chest, my hands trembling. "What if I just destroyed him?" I asked. "What if this makes me the villain?" She sat down next to me, leaned her shoulder against mine, and said, "He destroyed himself. All you did was stop covering for it." I wanted that to be enough. I wanted to believe it. But the knot in my chest stayed there. The part of me that had loved him, the father of my child, the man who held me through miscarriages, who made Sunday gumbo and danced in the kitchen, still felt like I'd just set fire to something sacred. And yet, I couldn't deny the other part of me. The woman who watched Kayla walk into my house thinking she belonged there. The woman who packed a suitcase while holding back tears. The woman who opened the door and didn't look back. That woman was done being quiet. Later that night, I lay on Aaliyah's pull-out couch with a glass of water on the nightstand, and the legal pad full of next steps folded beside me. My chest still hurt, but there was a strange stillness under the ache, like something had finally landed. There was no undoing what we sent, no rewinding, no pretending. Darnell would see that email first thing Monday morning, and so would the people who signed his paycheck. I had no idea what would happen next. I didn't know if he'd get fired or put on leave or just warned quietly like so many men before him. But I knew this. I had spoken. I had documented. I had taken what was hiding in shadows and held it under bright light. That had to mean something. I pulled the blanket up to my chin and stared at the ceiling. I wasn't proud. I wasn't relieved. I was just here, in my body, in this moment, scared and sad and angry, but not silent. Not. For the first time since this mess started, I felt like I had drawn a line in the sand and dared someone to cross it. And that, even in the middle of all this pain, felt like power. The chair creaked when I sat down, and the conference room felt colder than it had any right to be. The AC was humming, low and steady, but it wasn't just that. The cold came from the people sitting across the table from me. An HR manager in a navy pantsuit with tight lips, and a VP I'd never seen before with silver hair and a clipboard full of papers. Darnell's office building downtown looked glossy from the outside, all glass and polished floors. But in here, it was all tension and paperwork. I gripped the flimsy paper cup of water in my hands, palms slick with sweat. No one was smiling. They'd already read the email. The folder was open, documents neatly stacked, some of them printed out with yellow highlights. One of Kayla's messages was right there at the top of the pile. "You were amazing last night." I stared at it for a second too long and looked away. "Can you walk us through everything?" the HR rep asked. I nodded slowly, throat tight, and started talking. My voice came out smaller than I wanted, but I didn't stop. I laid it all out. How I found the text in the bathroom, how I replied to bait her, how she showed up at our home with cupcakes like she belonged there. I told them about the unlocked work iPad, the matching dates between the hotel receipts and his business trips, the Cash App history that made it impossible to deny. I avoided eye contact for most of it. Every time I looked up, I saw the VP's blank face, just nodding and scribbling notes. I felt like I was putting my life on trial in front of people who didn't care about me, who didn't know how much it cost me just to be here. There was this awful weight pressing on my chest, the shame of sounding like a bitter wife, the fear that they'd think this was personal drama and not a professional violation. But I kept going, even when my voice cracked, even when my hands trembled. I talked about the power imbalance, about how Kayla was an intern, how Darnell never disclosed any of it, how their relationship wasn't just sneaky, it was unethical. I was shaking, but I didn't stop. When I finally paused, the room went quiet. The HR woman flipped through the stack like she was double-checking a grocery list. Then she asked, "Do you understand what this means for his future with the company?" That question landed in my gut like a punch. I looked up slowly, locking eyes with her. My throat burned. "I understand better than anyone," I said, barely above a whisper. The loyalty I had to Darnell felt like a ghost still tugging at my sleeve, whispering reminders about the mortgage, our child, our years together. But the anger had grown louder than the ghost. This wasn't about just him anymore. It was about what kind of woman I was willing to be, one who swallowed it or one who named it. I took a deep breath, adjusted my spine against the stiff office chair, and said again, this time louder, "Yes, I understand exactly what this could mean." The VP wrote something down and nodded, still not looking up. I felt like I'd just signed something invisible and permanent with those words. The meeting ended with quiet thank yous and clipped goodbyes. No hugs, no reassurances. I left the building feeling like I'd been scraped raw on the inside. The sun outside was too bright. It made my eyes water. I climbed into Alia's car without saying a word, just closed the door and stared out the window while she pulled away from the curb. Her hand rested on the gear shift like she was waiting for me to say something, but I didn't have the words yet. My phone started buzzing in my lap. Darnell. Again. I let it ring twice before answering. "What did you do, Simone?" he said, his voice loud, panicked. "You sent that to HR? Are you trying to ruin me?" I didn't answer right away. My heart was pounding in my chest like a drum. He kept going. "You want me fired? You want me blacklisted? What happens to the mortgage, huh? What happens to Jeremiah? To our family?" He was desperate, and it wasn't a performance this time. I could hear the fear, the shame, and maybe deep under it, the regret. "I didn't destroy anything," I said. "You did that all on your own." He went quiet. I imagined him standing in our kitchen or pacing in the hallway, his hands in his hair, trying to make sense of a world he thought he controlled. "I told the truth," I said, calm but sharp. "And if that truth ruins you, that's not my fault." He exhaled hard on the other end, like he'd been punched. "You think this is just about you and me?" he asked. "This is bigger than that, Simone. You gave them a reason. You gave them what they wanted. You made me their example." I almost laughed. The same man who couldn't keep his hands off an intern was now trying to guilt me with black politics. Then maybe, I said slowly, you should have thought about that before you turned her into your side project. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking again, but not from fear this time. It felt more like I'd peeled off a bandage that had been festering for years and was finally letting the wound breathe. Aaliyah didn't ask what he said. She didn't need to. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes, just letting the silence hold me for a moment. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was running or reacting. I'd done what needed to be done. It still hurt. God, it hurt. But the kind of hurt that comes from cutting something out that was killing you. That night, back at her apartment, I didn't drink. I didn't cry. I just sat on the edge of the guest bed, staring at the wall, breathing slow. The fallout had officially started. There'd be more calls, more consequences, more mess, but I'd crossed the line. I had chosen truth over silence, boundaries over image. And as scary as that was, it also made me feel clean, not whole, not healed, but honest. I could finally breathe without choking on my own denial. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The knife hit the cutting board harder than I meant it to. I was chopping onions at my mama's kitchen counter in South Dallas, wearing an apron I hadn't touched in months, trying to focus on something, anything, besides the mess my life had become. The smell was sharp, the air thick with cooking oil, gospel music playing low in the background. Mama moved behind me, humming and stirring greens, acting like everything was normal. Then my phone buzzed. I wiped my hand on a towel, picked it up, and saw the message from my Aunt Yvette. Girl, what are you doing to that man? I just stared at it. Like those 12 words had the power to knock the air out of me. A second later, the phone rang. Darnell's sister. I didn't answer. Then came the texts. His mama, a deacon from his church, even one of the older women who used to babysit Jeremiah when he was little. All asking what I did, why I'd taken it so far, what happened to keeping things private. Cold-hearted, disrespectful, throwing away a marriage over one mistake. I stood there blinking at the screen, hands wet, knife still in the air, like I was suddenly the villain in a story I didn't even start. My mama turned the burner down and looked over at me. "That your aunt?" she asked, without even needing to check. I nodded once. She sighed and leaned against the counter. "You knew this was gonna happen," she said gently, not judging, just stating it like a fact. I felt my body go still, like something was locking up inside me. "They're acting like I cheated," I said, voice shaking. "Like I blew up a perfect life for no reason." The words stung coming out. They weren't there when I found those receipts. When I watched Kayla walk into my house like she belonged. When I looked at my son and couldn't even explain why I was leaving. My voice cracked, but I didn't cry. Not yet. My phone buzzed again. "You could have handled this in the family," one message read. "Why'd you have to go make it public?" Another one. "You're punishing him for something all men do." That one made me want to scream. I placed the knife down, stepped away from the counter, and just stood there, staring at nothing. I felt small and exposed, like no matter what Darnell did, I would always be the one blamed for breaking things. That's when Mama set her spoon down and came to stand beside me. She didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at my phone, then at my face. Then, out of nowhere, she said, "Your daddy had a whole other child." I blinked hard and turned to face her. "What?" She nodded slowly. "Before you were born. He was messing around with some woman from down the street, got her pregnant. I told him I'd leave if he didn't end it. He begged. I stayed." My mouth went dry. "You never told me that." She shrugged like it was just another story in a long list of sacrifices. "Wasn't something I was proud of," she said, "and everybody told me not to blow up my family over it. Told me to pray, forgive, think of you. So I did." The weight of that secret hit me like a punch in the chest. All those years she'd been quiet, strong, sure, but quiet. Carrying that betrayal like it was a duty. "You made him keep the baby secret?" I asked. She looked away. "It wasn't right," she said. "But I was scared and tired, and I thought maybe if I kept things together, It would be enough. I couldn't speak for a moment. My throat felt tight and my hands were shaking again. That story wasn't just about her. It was about me. It was the blueprint she handed me without knowing it. Stay. Swallow it. Protect the image. Protect the man. "I'm mad at you," I said, and it came out quiet but sharp. "You should have told me." She nodded. "I know." The gospel music kept playing softly in the background, the smell of greens filling the room like nothing had changed, but everything had. I wiped my hands and stepped away from the counter again. My heart was pounding. "So all those times you warned me not to ruin my marriage?" I said. "You weren't protecting me. You were just trying to justify what you did." She didn't deny it, didn't argue. Just stood there in her house, holding a wooden spoon like it could keep time from collapsing. And for a minute, I hated everyone. Darnell, his family, hers, the church ladies, all of them. All the women who stayed and called it strength. All the men who messed up and expected forgiveness like it was part of the vows. I walked out of the kitchen to get air, sat on the back porch and tried to breathe. The air was thick and warm, and the cicadas were screaming like the world was on fire. My phone kept buzzing inside, but I left it. I needed a second to feel my own thoughts without everyone else's voices crowding in. My mother stepped out after a minute and sat beside me. She didn't say anything right away, just looked out at the yard like we were two strangers watching something distant. Then she reached over and took my hand, squeezed it hard. "I don't want you to end up bitter and tired like I did," she said. Her voice was rough. "Even if I don't agree with every step you're taking, I see you trying to stand up for yourself. And that's more than I did." I didn't respond. I just let her hold my hand while my eyes stung with tears. I hadn't wanted to cry in front of her. Maybe we were both victims of the same script, passed down like a family recipe. But I wasn't going to keep cooking with it. By the end of the night, I was back at Aaliyah's apartment, sitting on the couch in one of her oversized sweatshirts, staring at a cup of peppermint tea I wasn't drinking. The calls had slowed down, but I knew more were coming. Darnell's world was unraveling, and I was the one everyone would point at for pulling the thread. But I also knew something else now, something I didn't know when I first walked out with that suitcase. I wasn't just leaving a man. I was leaving a legacy of silence, of staying because they said we should, of sacrificing peace for the illusion of respectability. I thought about my son, about what he'd seen, what he'd remember, and I told myself again, quietly this time, but with more certainty than ever, you didn't destroy your family. You just refused to pretend anymore, and whatever came next, I'd face it with my eyes open. The paper in front of me looked colder than I expected. Petition for divorce. Those were the first words at the top, typed in bold. I sat across from Aaliyah at her office, but this time, it wasn't two friends talking over wine and blankets. This was business, legal. I was her client now. The air smelled like printer ink and coffee, and the desk between us was covered in neat stacks of documents. I picked up the pen, fingers shaking just enough for me to notice. I didn't want to cry, but my eyes were already burning. I thought about our wedding day, the heat, the laughter, the way Darnell looked at me like I was his whole future. I thought about Jeremiah's baby pictures, the townhouse we built together, the kitchen my parents helped us renovate, down to the backsplash. None of that meant anything in these papers. It was just assets now, items to divide, boxes to check. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name anyway. It felt like cutting a cord with a dull knife. It hurt and it dragged, but it was final. That signature belonged to a different version of me. We went through the checklist like we were splitting groceries. House, cars, checking accounts, savings, 401k, my parents' loan. When Aaliyah brought up the house, I hesitated. "I don't even want it," I muttered. "I don't want to see it. I don't want to walk through that door ever again." She looked up from the folder and said, "Then force the sale. Let it go and take what's owed. If you leave it in his hands, your parents lose that money. You lose your share." I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. The guilt twisted in my gut anyway. It felt selfish, greedy, like taking food off his plate. I imagined him sitting in the empty living room with boxes and bills, and that part of me that still loved the man he used to be winced. But then I remembered the hotel bills, the Cash App transfers. The nights he said, "Don't worry about it, babe, I got us," while spending on another woman. My mouth went dry, and I just nodded. Aaliyah kept moving through the list: custody arrangements, visitation schedules, holiday rotations. I tried to stay focused, but my mind kept drifting to Jeremiah, to how I'd explain this in a way that didn't break him. When I picked Jeremiah up from school that afternoon, he dropped his backpack in the back seat without a word and climbed in, still sweaty from gym class. We drove for a few minutes in silence. I could see his profile in the corner of my eye, jaw tight, eyes fixed out the window. "Baby," I said gently, "I need to tell you something." He didn't turn, just stared at the cars passing on the freeway. "Things are going to change a little. Your dad and we're getting a divorce." The word landed like a brick between us. His hands balled into fists in his lap. "Why?" he said, barely moving his lips. I stayed calm. "Because too many things happened that can't be undone. And I need to take care of myself so I can keep being a good mom to you." He didn't say anything at first. Then he turned, looked right at me and said, "I hate both of you." My heart cracked in half. I wanted to pull over, hold him, explain, beg him to understand. But I didn't. I just nodded and said, "I know, and you're allowed to feel that." Because he was. Because he'd lost something too. That night, after dinner, he locked himself in Aaliyah's guest room and didn't say a word. I left a plate outside the door. I didn't knock. I sat on the air mattress in her spare room and stared at the ceiling. I'd signed the papers, told my son, set the wheels in motion. So why did I feel so hollow? The guilt wrapped around my ribs like a belt. I thought about what Jeremiah said, about hating us both, and part of me wondered if he was right. Maybe we'd both failed him. Maybe walking away from a broken thing still counted as breaking it. But deep down, I knew I wasn't walking away for nothing. I was walking because staying had started to kill pieces of me I couldn't get back. I laid there in the dark, hearing Aaliyah's keyboard clacking from the other room and Jeremiah's silence through the wall, and I asked myself the same question over and over. Was this the right thing? The answer didn't come easy. It didn't come clean. But it did come. A whisper, low and steady. "You're allowed to protect yourself." I rolled over and hugged the pillow tighter, trying to slow my breathing. My whole body ached with a sadness I didn't know how to carry. It wasn't just the divorce. It was the layers of it. The loss of a future I thought we'd have. The fear of raising a boy who might blame me forever. The exhaustion of doing the right thing and still feeling punished. I wanted someone to hold me and say, "You did enough," but no one could. That was the part they don't tell you, how lonely doing the right thing can feel. Aaliyah knocked gently and peeked her head in. "You good?" I nodded, lying. She left me alone, which I appreciated. I needed to be with the silence for a bit. I needed to feel the ache fully before I could let it pass. Somewhere under the ache, there was something steady trying to grow. It wasn't peace yet, but it was the beginning of self-respect. And that had to count for something. Maybe later I'd cry again. Maybe Jeremiah wouldn't speak to me for days, but I would still be here, breathing, still standing, and that had to be enough for now. The next morning, I woke up early and made Jeremiah's lunch like I always did. I kept the routine, even if everything else had shifted. When he came into the kitchen, he didn't say much, just nodded and grabbed his bag. I let him go. No pressure, no smile he'd know was fake, just presence. I poured coffee for myself and Aaliyah, then sat at her dining table, staring out the window at a world that was still turning. It was strange how normal everything looked while my life sat in pieces. Still, there was a calmness in my chest I hadn't felt in weeks. Not peace, not relief, just clarity. I'd filed, I'd spoken the truth, I'd protected myself, and no matter how hard the days ahead might be, I knew I wasn't lost. I wasn't broken. I was choosing myself, finally, and that had to mean something. I sipped my coffee, watching the light spill across the floor, and whispered to myself, "Keep going." That's all I could do. That's all I needed to do. The front door creaked louder than I remembered as I pushed it open with my shoulder, balancing a cardboard box against my hip. The air inside the townhouse was still, dusty, like the place had exhaled and gone silent without us. I stepped into the living room and it didn't feel like mine anymore. Just furniture and echoes. The rug was rolled up. The picture frames were off the walls. It looked like a stage after the final scene, props scattered, lights off. Darnell was already there, folding up one of his old suits and placing it in a plastic bin. We didn't say much. We'd already fought, already cried, already said too many words that couldn't be unsaid. Now it was just logistics. "These yours?" he asked, pointing to a stack of dishes. I nodded. "What about the blender?" he asked. "My mom gave us that." "Keep it," I said. My voice was flat, my movements mechanical. I walked past him to the hallway closet and started packing Jeremiah's posters. I didn't even look at them, just rolled them tight, tucked them in the box. It was too much to feel and sort at the same time, so I shut the feelings off and just moved. I went room by room, collecting what was mine and pretending that didn't include the memories. The spice jars I bought on a random Target run, my favorite throw blanket, a few old books with notes in the margins. In the bedroom, I grabbed a stack of folded towels and turned around to find Darnell standing in the doorway, arms crossed. He looked tired. Not just from today, deep tired, like the kind that lives in your bones. "We don't have to do this," he said. "We can fix it. I'll go to therapy. I'll quit the job. We can shut the world out and just start over." I didn't answer right away. My legs felt heavy, like the floor was holding me down. He stepped forward. "We don't have to let HR and your friend and the damn courts decide our life. You and me, we're still here." For a second, I could almost see it. What we were. The Sunday mornings. Our son learning to ride his bike, laughing in the kitchen over burnt pancakes. I felt the weight of it all pressing on my chest. I almost folded. But then I saw her again. Kayla. Standing in this house like she belonged here. I pictured the phone in my hand, the message glowing, the lie laid bare. I remembered my mother's face when she finally told me about the other child my father had. The years she stayed silent, strong, exhausted. I remembered the version of myself who walked out of this house with a suitcase and a spine she didn't know she had. "No," I said. Just that. Simple, sharp, final. Darnell swallowed hard, looked away, nodded once. He didn't argue. He knew it too. Whatever we had, whatever he thought he could salvage, it had already crumbled. I walked around him, back to the kitchen, and picked up the last small box. It had the framed picture of Jeremiah as a toddler, sticky with jelly, grinning up at the camera. I stared at it for a long time before wrapping it in a dish towel and placing it gently inside. That was the part I was taking with me. The real piece, not the lie, not the performance, the part that mattered. By the time we reached the closing office, my body was sore and my throat was raw, like I'd been running uphill for days. The real estate agent handed us the papers without ceremony, just numbers and signatures and lines for initials. When I slid my keys across the table, I felt something break loose in my chest. Not regret, not relief, just grief, quiet and dense, like something sacred had been buried, even if it had already died a long time ago. Darnell didn't say anything. He signed quickly, stood, and walked out without looking back. I stayed seated a little longer, staring at the space where my name sat beside the words, "Former Owner." That hit harder than I expected. I was no longer part of that house's story. But maybe that wasn't a loss. Maybe it was freedom. I left the building without crying. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I was too tired to give the pain anything more. Later that night, in my new apartment in Fort Worth, I sat on the floor surrounded by unpacked boxes. The space was smaller. No dining room, no two-car garage, no upgraded appliances. But it was mine. Mine in a way that felt clean. I leaned against the wall and listened to Jeremiah breathe through the door of his new room. He hadn't spoken much since the move. Just short answers and long silences. But he was here, with me. I reached over and grabbed a blanket out of a box and wrapped it around my shoulders. The floor creaked differently here. The air smelled like new paint and eucalyptus. I didn't know how the bills would work out yet. I didn't know what our holidays would look like. I didn't know how long it would take before my son looked at me with softness again. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't lying to myself. There was no pretending, no waiting for the next betrayal, just this moment, just the truth. And in the quiet, I let myself whisper it. You did the right thing. I didn't feel strong yet, but I felt free, and that was enough to sleep. I tilt back in the plastic chair on my little apartment balcony, my legs tucked under me, a cheap glass of red wine sweating in my hand. The eucalyptus diffuser hums behind the screen door, mixing with the distant sound of traffic and someone playing old Anita Baker upstairs. My laptop rests on my thighs, warm against my skin, and the cursor blinks under Aaliyah's latest post. My story, anonymized, but every word is still mine. Already messages are rolling in. Women sliding into my DMs like water finding cracks, some married, some fresh off breakups, some still living in houses they're afraid to leave. How did you do it? They ask. How do you not hate yourself? I scroll through their words, feel their ache through the screen. I type back slow, no big speeches, just honesty. I tell them I was scared every damn day. That I cried so hard I threw up some nights, that I questioned everything. But I also tell them this. I sleep better now. I eat when I'm hungry. I don't pace waiting for a phone to light up. And most days, I feel like I'm coming home to myself. Therapy once a week keeps me steady. I sit on that couch and say things I've never said out loud. That I was ashamed of being left, even though I'm the one who walked. That part of me still watches my son when he plays video games, wondering if I broke something in him that'll never heal. That I miss the version of Darnell I used to believe in, even though I know he was half fantasy. My therapist nods, doesn't rush. She asks hard questions and lets the silence work. Outside those sessions, I throw myself into work. My new job, project lead at a small tech firm, comes with stress, but it also comes with space. Space to speak, to push back in meetings, to pitch ideas and not apologize for them. I used to shrink in those rooms, second-guess every suggestion, every instinct. Now I sit straighter. I correct people. I say no without smiling to soften it. It's not confidence yet, but it's louder than before. Co-parenting with Darnell is tightrope walking in heels. Polite exchanges, scheduled drop-offs, awkward silences when we pass each other Jeremiah's overnight bag. Sometimes he slips and tries to talk like we're still us, sends a meme, mentions a show we used to watch. I don't respond. I stick to logistics. When he shows up late or forgets something, I breathe through it. I tell myself I'm not here to teach him how to be a better man. I'm here to protect the peace I fought for. It's messy. My son is still mad, still testing boundaries, still quiet in ways that break my heart. But I show up, every day. I sit with him at dinner, even if we eat in silence. I drive him to school. I show him that love didn't leave, just changed shape. Back on the balcony, I read another message. A woman says, I think I'm living with my own Darnell. That hits hard. Not because of him, but because of how many of us there are. Smart, kind women carrying secrets that don't belong to us, blaming ourselves for the wreckage someone else caused. I type, you're not crazy, you're not too much, and you're not alone. I mean every word, because I remember what it felt like to think I was the only one unraveling. Now, every message reminds me I wasn't. We're everywhere. Hiding in office bathrooms, whispering to best friends, searching for proof on someone's phone at midnight, and still showing up the next day like nothing's wrong. But something was wrong. And naming it, that's where the power starts. I look around my apartment, the one I signed the lease for alone, and let my eyes linger on the little things. The thrifted bookshelf, the blue mug I drink tea from every morning, the tiny basil plant on the kitchen sill that somehow isn't dead yet. It's not glamorous. It's not what I pictured when I said, forever in a white dress. But it's honest. It's mine. I pull the blanket tighter around my shoulders and feel the breeze cool against my skin. Somewhere inside, the fear is still there. Money is tight. My heart still aches. The future feels wide and uncertain. But I'm not checking anyone's location. I'm not hiding bruises on my pride. I'm not begging someone to remember who I am. That kind of peace isn't loud, but it's deep. I close the laptop and set the wine glass down on the floor beside me. I stare up at the sky, dark and stretched above this new life, and feel the smallest smile pull at my lips. I whisper it out loud, just to hear it. I didn't just survive this. I breathe in deep. I chose myself. The words settle over me like a second skin. Not heavy, not sad. Solid. Real. I say it again, stronger this time. I chose myself, and I'm not going back. That's the truth. No dramatic music, no triumphant ending, just me on this balcony, tired but whole. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm not running anymore. I'm standing still, and that feels like a beginning. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It means more than I can say. If any part of it spoke to you, I'd love to know where you're watching from, so drop your city or country in the comments. And if you haven't already, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It truly helps us keep sharing real stories like this one. There are many others here just like mine, full of strength, heartbreak, and starting over. With love and respect, thank you for being here.